Good morning.
I see that somebody just put us live streaming, so just FYI to everyone. Thanks, Dina or Holly, whoever just did that, and welcome everybody to our second investment call. In your Outlook or whatever you use, there is we have a lot of information sent over the Leon County policy, the city one, the ad valorem. And so we're going to jump into it. Okay, we need to start with a call to order. So I'm doing that, and I'm asking if we can get a roll call, please. Jacinta? And Patrick's telling us he's driving through South Georgia back to Tallahassee in case he goes in and out.
Holly, can you unmute?
Did you want me to?
Jacinta?
Jacinta seems like she's stuck on
Okay.
the. There she is. All right. Way.
Sorry about that, everyone.
No worries.
Okay. Scott Fennell,
I'm here.
John Grayson,
Good morning. I'm here.
Tika Green, Scott Ross,
Here. Here, sorry.
and Patrick Scott,
Scott 3 checking in.
Liza McFadden.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Awesome. Great. Okay, we need to do our approval of the agenda. So if somebody doesn't mind formally moving it and giving it a second, I'd be most appreciative.
I'll move it. Acceptance.
I'll second. Or someone.
Okay, perfect. And I'm going to assume there's nobody that's going to object. If so, please say so now. Otherwise, we're going to move on. Okay, great. Perfect. All right. Do we have any general public comment, Jacinta?
We have no public comment.
Okay. All right. So we are now at the meat of the agenda. We're going to walk right into it. This is the work plan development, the goal statement. And I'll kind of just, for the public, walk through what we want to get done here. A discussion of the reviewed investment and reserve policies and schedule of activities. So work plan development and goal statement. You had a lot of attachments, and part of, and like you guys are, you may be like trying to go back and forth between them all. We need to go through and basically make what the goals were. We talked at our last meeting about, the three things that you typically want to do with an investment policy. And so I'm going to just kind of open the floor for that discussion. And I don't know if anybody wants to lean in on that. I know the city did a really good job with kind of stating what they were looking for in there, and other folks may. So I'm going to open the floor for conversation around that issue.
Well, I'll jump in. This is Scott Fennell. I think it seems like all the policies, and I'll be honest, I'm behind on my homework. I unfortunately caught COVID, so I was out of commission for a little while. But my perusal of the various policies, and I know the state policy pretty well, it's protecting the principal. However we want to word that would be the number one main goal. And then, of course, ensuring liquidity. You need to make sure you can pay your bills, and then the last objective should be to maximize return. And I think that's pretty standard amongst these types of policies for this purpose. So I think those are the three that we should focus on. And I'm not a words person. Hopefully we have someone on here that's a word person, but however we want to word it, I think we have.
And Scott, I think that's exactly what we talked about at the last meeting, which we've kind of moved, honestly, just because you guys aren't on a formal Children's Services Council, to trying, and I think this is good for the public, to kind of give a heads up each meeting where we're leaning, and then not vote on anything till the following meeting. So I feel like and you are articulating exactly what we said at the last meeting. And so, I'd like people to weigh in if there's, these are kind of the three things I also think are really critical, but does anybody have anything else that they would want to add in as a key piece of what we want to look for?
No, I think those three principles are pretty key.
Okay.
I'll
And we've got some awesome wordsmithing people around the table here. So rather than, sort of have the exact words, what my recommendation would be that if we're in agreement on those are the three things that we care about, I would take a motion for us to move forward with protecting the principal, ensuring liquidity, and maximizing our return. Putting that into a formal motion, and then opening it up for discussion. I think if we can move forward, we can let the staff then, work with that language as we move forward. But I think it gives, the really overview of where we want to go. So if people are in agreement, again, I would love, and I'm sorry we have to be so formal in this the way we work here, but I would love somebody to make a motion, someone to second, and for us to be able to move forward with that.
I'll make a motion to move forward.
Thanks.
Second.
Okay, very good. And if there's any disagreement, if folks could let me know now, otherwise we'll go ahead and move forward with that. Yay, you guys, this is a Monday morning and we're just like steaming through it. I'm very, very proud of you. Despite the fact that you might not have done 100% of your homework, Scott, you got us off to a really good start. Thank you. So, okay, so that's kind of where we are. And again, I got to juggle back to my agenda over here. Now we need to have, Jacinta, any general public comment? Oh, sorry, that's the goal statement. Okay, we now need to move to a discussion of reviewed investment and reserve policies. And that is going to be a little bit more in depth. If everybody didn't have, and I don't know, Scott, if everybody else didn't have time to look through it, because if they didn't, I know each of you has sort of expertise in their particular area, right? I know a lot about doing these investment policies from a nonprofit perspective. Each of you guys bring your own perspective. And so, part of what we could do is just, because there is a lot attached, but we could talk about both the investment policies and the reserve policies, and just, I think talk about it from, and I'll go ahead and kick it off. And I think I shared this last time. I'm very used to, with nonprofit IPSs, being able to be much broader than I think government are. In my conversations with Bank of America, Truist, other groups, we typically look at, and I'm going to be super generic here, but like a 70-30, and that's on a very generic side or something like that, on an investment policy. We really probably, after doing homework and looking at what was sent, probably have to be way more diligent about it. And, I'd like, folks to lean in a little bit and talk about your experiences with government funds and what you have found to be helpful as you think through that. So hopefully some of you that have worked with government funds don't mind leaning in, just to bring the public that's watching, if anybody is, this up to date on some of the things that are really important that we need to think about moving forward.
Can you explain your 70-30 Liza, did
Yeah,
you just throw out there?
if I was doing a traditional IPS with a nonprofit, we would look at, maybe 70% equity, 30% fixed income. We would talk about, because when you guys talk about protecting your principal, we tend to be more very long in our thought process about protecting that principal. And I think this is my takeaway from reading everything. I think with government funds, my sense is you're not necessarily looking at a 10-year horizon all the time, especially when you're getting started. I think my sense is from reading some of this that you may be being a little more protectionist from a government perspective. And so I'll kick it off with saying that the legislation does allow for an IPS, but after reviewing this and talking to leaders with banks that handle this, they tend to shy away from government entities because there are so many bureaucratic issues that change over time, and the legislation really dictates a lot more than you would see with a nonprofit IPS.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And, my experience is solely with the state. So we have the ability, just because of the size of our pool, to actually house staff that are internal fund managers, and they focus on the liquidities, and we have an ultra short duration portfolio and a short duration portfolio. And then we use our external managers for the more longer duration and more complex, when it comes down to it, investments, but they are 100% fixed. We don't dabble at all in equities, even to the point where we've had proposals to utilize treasury strips and then invest in like an exchange fund, and we stay away from it because it goes away from our policy, which is staying out of equities, staying in fixed investments. So, and I think that's appropriate when you're talking about this purpose, where it's not a pension fund or something like that. Even when, pension funds with government, they can get a lot more creative, but our main goal is to not lose any taxpayer dollars.
Right. And I think the volatility of the current market makes it even more tasty kind of conversation, so to speak.
Yeah, and if you're keeping with the second of, making sure you have liquidity, you can time things out in a way that you don't even realize losses in the fixed world. If you can help it, if you do it well, if you keep your duration short. And so, but it seems like we're going to more than likely need, actually, it seems like we're definitely going to need an external manager who would do all that. And then we could just compare against a benchmark that we decide is appropriate and make sure that, they're meeting what we need them to meet. Because I don't think we have the staff to actually track and
yeah, and I can tell you, Scott, one thing that I did I did look into. So first of all, I don't know that we have the expertise on the staff, and I don't want to make them uncomfortable moving into something they wouldn't do. But more importantly, if we have an external manager, there is a level of insurance that comes with that. And it makes it much more less likely that somebody could sue us, because it shows that we've done our due diligence and we've brought somebody in who's an expert. So that actually is the higher reason for me to want to have somebody that has that expertise.
Are you, I'm sorry, I don't mean to hog the whole conversation, but are we planning on, whether it's this group or another, maintaining some level of an advisory group, or am I jumping ahead too far? That would be
no, excellent question. I have never been on a board where we did not have an ongoing investment group that, once we issued the RFP, came back and at least on a 6 months, although I will say I prefer quarterly, got a briefing from those managers so that we were very carefully watching the market and looking at the benchmarks that they set and what they met. I'm not a big fan of moving benchmarks around a lot, but you will see performers over a long period of time who don't do well. And I think it's important that there's a group that has been monitoring that.
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily asking you guys to sign up for that. I'm not saying I wouldn't. But it's an excellent question, and I would love other people to weigh in. Again, everything that I'm saying comes from a nonprofit structure and how we do it. So I don't know, and you guys can tell me from a government perspective if that is also the way that you guys work.
Yeah, Leon County has an investment oversight committee. We also have an external advisor, but the external advisor only manages about half the portfolio. The rest of the portfolio is in investment pools that are the clerk's finance department manages. So they have a treasury manager who manages what's in SPIA or what's in Florida Prime. And so that's what the council is going to be probably wanting to do, I would imagine, is take advantage of some of the local government investment pools, see which ones. I don't know if SPIA is a possibility, but that's a popular one.
It's not, unfortunately. We shut SPIA down at the state level for anyone that wasn't grandfathered in, except for specific entities, universities, and
Okay.
state agencies. So I looked into it because I think that would be perfect, because I'm a fan, obviously, of the people that work for me and invest the money. So, but we're shut down. Leon County is one of the ones that are grandfathered in.
Right.
But I know I've talked to the people that run Florida Prime and Public Trust Advisors, I think is who oversees it, the FL Class fund. So there are funds out there that, would respond, I would think, to an RFP that we might be able to get involved in that would help us manage it.
I agree.
Right.
I've talked to a couple that would as well.
And then our external advisor is Insight, and then they control the portfolio as far as investing in commercial paper or short-term treasuries or AAA mortgage-backed type securities. But it's a more volatile part of the portfolio, and we manage on a 1 to 3 year.
So,
And now I'm hearing that you can buy treasuries for 4%. We're in that kind of a volatile market. So if you wanted to buy treasuries and make a quick 4%, but then that money's not really liquid unless you carry it to the end.
right.
And I don't know what you're talking right now. As far as you have your operating expenses, and I don't know how much annually in your budget you are going to push out to your service providers.
So Holly, we did some forecasting. Would you mind pulling that screen? Am I asking you to do something you don't have in front of you?
I have it. I can pull it up, but just give me a quick second. I will say that the ones that we kind of prepared were based on back in April before we actually passed our budget. But I'm going to pull it up. Just give me a moment. And Sika, if you or John want to share in terms of the kind of the operating budget and what you're doing now to answer that side of the question while I pull that up.
Yeah.
And it may be helpful to pull up the operating budget that the council just passed.
I'll cue that up as well. Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
so that we can see a little bit about what that looks like. I think, and Liza, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think what we are really looking to do is put the reserves that are put aside every year into that investment piece while leaving the operating in a more liquid situation, at least initially. And so, again, I do not know much about investments, although I have heard there are some instruments out there that allow for a 24-hour, 48-hour liquidity piece, which is probably what we would be looking to have in the instance that we really need to get a hold of funds rather quickly. For example, in the instance of a hurricane and we want to push some funds out in a special way. So operating, Holly, if you'll go to our operating budget.
Did that flip for you?
Yes,
Yep.
you did.
Okay.
So if you can see, we're projecting a total income of somewhere around 12.5 million. Of that, our current policy says that we will put in reserve 5% of the projection. So we budget at 95% collection rate, but this reserve that you see under expenses is off of the projection, not off of the 95. So right now, our total, I'm trying to see, we don't have it in here. Our operating administrative, that's what I'm looking for. And there it is. Our total administrative is 1.4 for this coming year. And then for program investments, we are hoping to push out close to 10.7 million. And that would be in this program year. So by September 30th, October 1 of next year, because of course we start over in October 1. So if this budget ends up being the actual budget, which we know there are going to be some variances, we're looking at a reserve of just over $701,000. So that is actually the money we'd want to start the investing piece with. And then I guess as we move into the space of actually having policy, actually having this investment advisory group, actually having that, we would want to push more and more into that, understanding that we have the liquidity that goes along with when we award funding. And so as we award funding, we would want to be able to pull it out so that we can get that funding out to the community investment partners.
And then Holly, could you walk them through the forecast so they see the growth over years? Because that's important too.
Sure. So I would call your attention to this gray shaded area, and kind of what you see on this last line is, I mean, clearly the math wasn't perfect when we did the projections in April, but you see kind of the 701 that Sika was just mentioning on the forecast here was more like 722. If we continue to reinvest at kind of 5% based on our current ad valorem, assuming that we stick with that and we don't make any changes, you kind of see how that line item grows year over year. We, based on previous conversations actually with Scott Ross about what is a kind of a good average for maybe holding in reserves, and I think that this is where Liza is going in terms of where do we draw the line of that 5%? Would we want to readjust that at some point in terms of our total operating? Now, this is a conservative estimate, and it's not considering, it's only considering the income from ad valorem and not considering rollover of unspent dollars, which we had last year, and we will again have at the end of this year, looking at our schedule and timeline of how we're going to make those disbursements. So it's not kind of taking that into consideration. It was just a very rough estimate of how that percentage might grow. And at what point we may want to consider adjusting that 5% set aside down to maybe a 1% set aside. So that was kind of what we were looking at here, is maybe at one point when we maybe exceed 20% of our total budget, or if we come close to 20% or the total income, that we may want to adjust. But that's where this number is that you kind of see here, that, and if we don't touch it, by the fiscal year 27, we could be upwards of $2 million specifically in that reserve line item if we continue at the methodology that we're doing today at that 5%.
And
if you
then,
go on, oh, I was just gonna say, if you go on to the next line, we actually did adjust it. So that's where we suggested is rolling it down to 1%. So that's why you'll see on page 2 that it goes from that 23, and then you see it kind of stays at that space because we adjusted it down to just 1% in this projected forecast. Sorry about that, Sika.
That's okay. That's okay. And then what I'd also like to add is, excuse me, we are of course just starting up. So we're not awarding as much money as we will award in 5 years, 10 years. And with that, we also need to keep in mind that we have to be able to keep our operation going before those ad valorem taxes are actually deposited, that revenue is deposited into our account. So our reserve could possibly be what we are using to deal with our operations costs as we award more and more money as the years go out. So I just think that is something to definitely keep in mind as well.
And I
Oh, yeah,
guess, oh, go ahead, Scott.
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, that's the most important part of having reserves, is so you don't have to borrow money to make your cash flow needs, which some small local governments have to do.
Exactly. We don't want to end up in that situation.
So this kind of begs the question a little bit is, I don't know, I mean, talking about an external advisor, you got to pay those folks. And I don't know, has anybody talked to the clerk possibly about banking the money with her and seeing what her treasury managers would recommend in regards to their access to pools? I know they've done that for some external organizations in the past.
No,
Is that-
it's a
No.
great idea.
That could give you access to, not to give their finance department more work to do, but I mean, they know the investment pools that the county uses, and they can set up separate accounts in regards to that until you build up enough of a portfolio to maybe attract an external advisor.
That's a great point, because I've used external advisors, and you're right. It's an added cost, well worth it in my opinion. But you do need to build it up. And then I wanted to kind of put a pin in a statement Sika made offhand, which is we do have Hurricane Ian coming down the pike. And in some ways it's advantageous that we haven't done anything yet here, because it gives us great flexibility. And do we reframe some of what we were going to do in programming? Or do we actually look at reserves? I think it's going to depend on, does this come in as a 2 or a 4, frankly?
Yeah.
And so I think flexibility right now is huge. And so, I'd like people's thoughts on, maybe we go a little slow on this right now while we feel our way through Hurricane Ian. I don't know why I keep wanting to say Ivan. I know there was an Ivan in the past, but
Don't bring Ivan
And it
back.
was a bad one.
It was
Back in 04.
I haven't
Yeah.
seen a good one yet.
Yeah, it was so Liza, absolutely agree with you. What I'll say is, from the council perspective, we do have this budget that we've approved. However, at any point, we can do budget amendments, we can pull the council back together, we can flip any of those pots to be what we needed to be available, what we need as we move into and see what Ian's gonna do, and if it's gonna impact our local area in the space that we need to, have some funding there.
And as a sidebar, unrelated to this conversation, but I will say it, I have done a lot of fundraising during hurricanes. It is an important time to do fundraising. And I, hope we're getting ready to, if it hits as something high, have a press release and a plan, but we can have that off.
So just out of curiosity, what kind of impacts to a hurricane would the council be responding to?
I think children's issues, obviously. I'm going to give you a great example. I ran the Hurricane Fund. It was originally called the Hurricane Charlie Fund in 2004. And then it got renamed the Hurricane Fund, and now Volunteer Florida runs it as the Disaster Fund. And what we found on children's issues were a couple that were staggeringly important to a community getting back up. There were several, and I'll go over them with you guys, because I think they're important for us to think about, because some of them are quite costly, and it doesn't mean that we wouldn't go to Volunteer Florida or others doing it. But, sometimes if you have, and having worked in foundations a long time, if you have a tiny bit of money and you say, I'll do this, but I need a match, we might be able to drive more money toward the Children's Services Council. I'm not saying we could, I'm saying it's worth a conversation. First and foremost, one of the as you guys know, there's usually a lot of money to go out from the state to get businesses back up. They don't necessarily give money to get nonprofits back up. And childcare centers are sometimes some of the hardest things to get back up. And yet parents can't go back to work without childcare centers working. So I think we've got to pay great diligence to childcare centers. The other thing that I would say that people often overlook, although with this administration and their focus on it, they may not, is the mental health issues that can happen with families as they go through deep trauma and are trying to come out of it. People lose their jobs for a period of time. Divorce rates go up. It is the highest time for suicides in the, it depends how bad it was, right? I worked Katrina, I worked Sandy up in New Jersey. So I've done a lot of this, and the impact on families, even getting, Red Cross comes in and they're going to be very focused on the immediate response. What I would highly recommend is that we do not engage in the immediate response, that we engage in those long-term things like, helping a center get back on its feet. Some of our homeless centers already are lacking windows and, may have some really challenging things they need to fix. And if their insurance had allowed them, to have broken windows, there may be some things like that. So, I don't know all of the issues, but I'm giving you guys a sense of what some of the issues in the past have been. What happens is Volunteer Florida runs an ESF, which is at the emergency center. It's all, how the volunteers respond and the nonprofits respond. But to my knowledge, Children's Services Councils have not been part of that conversation. And that may be, Sika, something we need to talk about offline to get you guys engaged through that process. But I do think then I've mentioned a few of the issues we might want to look at. But I think that if we can be a voice that helps say, if it hit Tallahassee, we think getting childcare centers up immediately, we think getting people back to school quicker is important, that we can make a difference, but we've got to, be very strategic about our thoughts there. And I feel like I'm taking us like a kind of off path here, but it also seems like a really important conversation given that we've got a hurricane to potentially bearing down at us.
No, I think Liza, the more those of us who are looking at the financial side understand about the operations and what could impact the needs for cash is going to help us build policy. Because what Scott Ross said, I'm 100% in agreement. Looking at the clerk and seeing if there's anything that office can do would be a great idea. But also, let's slow walk this a little bit, and because it's sounding like, based on what I just saw on the projections, we're not talking about a whole lot of money, and we're talking about cash that could be needed pretty quickly.
Right.
So even the idea of using an external manager to buy a 2-year treasury, that could not be a good idea for us for this, right, what this group is doing, because as Scott said, it's great right now. You buy a 4% rate, but the Fed's going to increase rates. And then now you've got a potential loss if you need that cash. If you need that cash, if the rates go up even a little bit, you're cutting, you're discounting the sale so you can liquidate. And that's not where we want to be. We want to be someplace that we're not going to take a hit for liquidating at any moment with this amount of money. If we build it up to where we have 2-3 million in reserves that we don't expect to need, we can look at maybe 20%, 30% of it going into something that's a little bit longer term, get a little bit better return. But as of right now, it sounds like we want as liquid as possible.
Right.
Yeah, as I'm hearing this kind of, and I apologize if I go out, I'm on 27. Liquidity seems to be number one here, right? Because if you don't have resources to be able to match these expenses, now we got a bigger issue than anything we can sign a dollar up to. So being able to understand what dollars are needed for, when they're going to be needed, the time horizon around that really helps us start to build things out to match kind of what's needed for any endeavors within the county.
Agreed. So I think I'm hearing unanimously 2 different recommendations. We don't need to take a vote. I think we just move forward on them. Number one is the clerk issue. And Scott, would you be able to make that introduction so we can have that call?
Yeah, I can introduce you. It'd probably be better
Scott,
if you,
sorry.
it'd probably be better if you talk to her independently in regards to
Sure, but if you could
what I
just
can-
make the introduction, that
Sure.
would be really helpful.
Mhm.
Liza, I'm pretty sure we're already connected to the clerk, so I think we've got that, but thank
Okay.
you, Scott.
Okay, great. Thanks, Holly. All right, so we've got that. And then I think the second thing is we're all agreeing, let's like slow walk it a little bit right now. We're gonna know just within days, unfortunately, what's gonna happen here. So, by the end of the week, we'll kind of have a sense of what we need to do. And Sika, you may be calling a full board meeting. I mean, I don't know. I think it's gonna depend on what happens.
Yeah, and I actually have already put in a request with FACT, our association, to see what policies or plans that our sister CSCs have regarding prioritization of emergency funds, recovery, that kind of thing, just so that I can see where their mind is, and it can help us frame what ours will look like.
Okay. The next thing on the agenda is schedule of activities, and I feel like we've kind of come up with them. They're not necessarily the ones I thought we would come up with a week ago, but that's okay, right? I would prefer we be flexible. And so we'll go ahead and move on those two, unless anybody has any other recommendations on an activity we should undertake right now. All right. Hearing none, Jaquita, is there any other public comment?
There is no public comment.
Okay. I'm so surprised because they almost always love to talk about money. All right. Next meeting date. Sika, were we trying to get on every other week? Or are you guys?
I'm going to yield. I'm going to yield to Dina, because
Okay.
she's kind of the administrator of this group.
Yes, she's been doing very diligent emails. Thank you, Dina.
Thank you. So one of the things that we were looking at is we have our next council meeting on October 20th. So when we were in our meeting this past month, they're really interested in kind of seeing where we're heading with the work group, and potentially providing them at that time with some draft policies for investment and reserve. So my thought was trying to meet at least a week prior to that, so that we can present to the work group any policies or any drafts that we may have, so that then we could look at those, agree on those, determine whether that's what we want to recommend to the council on the 20th.
Okay, so I guess it's so much of this is dependent on the hurricane.
Right.
If I can just jump in, and Sika, maybe this is not what you were going to say. Go ahead.
I was going to say, why don't we hold?
Just
Why
with the
don't we hold
hurricane
it?
and all. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird time.
Yeah, why don't we hold? Because we should know in a few days what Ian Ivan is going to do. And then we can get something out to see if we need to try to get together prior to our council meeting, or we could be calling the council together to repurpose some funding in our current budget, not our future budget, but our current budget.
Okay, that makes sense. I think I would like, Holly, though, if you can, for us to go ahead and move forward with the conversation with the clerk, if you can help me schedule that, so that just in case everything calms down, that we feel like we're moving forward in some way.
Yep. And so she'll pull Dina into that, because we need to, Dina hasn't met the clerk yet either. So we're still doing that onboarding as well. So I feel like we have some good direction going. And yes, our council is anxious to know how this is moving forward, but we also are trying to really have the message that we want to be very deliberate with this. We aren't losing any money, if you will. So while we want to get one in place, we are still fairly new. And Liza, your guidance and the work of you all is just very helpful for those of us who just put it in and let it sit, versus having a real plan on how it goes. So I think we'll, I absolutely agree with where this is going, and I think we're going to be good. So we'll figure out what's going on with Ian, and then we'll determine whether we need to get together before the next meeting or we can have to do something different.
Okay, and the next thing on the agenda is the next agenda, which I think we've all decided could be quite flexible. So I'm not going to say any more about that other than to say the same thing, Sika, you said before, is can we put a pin in it for a second, see what happens this week, and then come back maybe via email with what that agenda looks like, and everybody can kind of lean in on it based on what happens.
Okay, so just for my clarification, Holly's going to contact the clerk marshal?
Yes,
You
so
already-
Holly already has that connection. So
Okay,
she'll
perfect.
do that, get Liza and Dina all connected. So Scott, take that off your list.
Scratch.
All right. So does anybody have any other comments, things that we should think about? Any other due diligence they want to mention as part of this meeting?
I think we're heading in a good direction.
You
I just don't know what kind of
so-
expectations you're managing for the council, because I think when Holly and I met at first, some people on the council were wanting to pretty aggressively put this money to work. And I think that, I don't know how much enthusiasm.
Scott, I was one of
temper.
them, so it's okay.
Okay. I just temper that enthusiasm a little bit.
Yeah, we'll have to, I'll help with that.
Okay.
But thank you guys. We moved really fast. Everybody was very articulate. I really appreciate it. Patrick, safe travels.
Yes, be safe. So let me, one quick thing, John, if you could stay on, John Grayson, we can do our
Yes.
quick little meeting now instead of waiting till later on this afternoon. And just for the public, that's an internal staff meeting, so.
Okay, well, everybody have a good week.
Yep.
All right.
All right.
Thanks very much.